Hey guys, I'm here again doing my review of the third presidential debate for 2016. This is going to be my final review because I was late doing these analysis videos originally. So let's get into the third presidential debate, shall we? This debate was held on October 19th and was hosted by Chris Wallace. Pretty good moderator. He was great. Everybody was pretty much a great moderator except for the second debate, which was Martha Raddatz and Anderson Cooper. They were pretty unfair to Trump. But for the most part, I really liked Chris Wallace. So on October 19th, Chris Wallace did this debate, and again, the candidates did not shake hands, which again really talks about how strong the rivalry is, but it wasn't as powerful as the second one. The second debate, when they didn't shake hands, I was like, ooh. But with this one, it's like, okay. I mean, kind of just happened again. So it didn't really have that impact, but again, it's still pretty meaningful how they really disliked each other and didn't bother to shake hands during this or before this debate. Now, Hillary Clinton said that the Supreme Court must serve the people and how it shouldn't, just help people at the top. Again, Hillary Clinton wouldn't really know much about serving the people. She is backed by the military industrial complex, Wall Street, big pharma, the corporations, everybody. She is literally the 1%. She funds the 1%, she's funded by 1%. She's just the 1%. And she keeps trying to disguise herself as, one of you. She's like, oh, my father was a small business owner, so she kind of tries to warm me up and say, hey, I'm one of you guys. Doesn't work. Maybe you were, maybe your father was a good person, maybe you were, but for the most part, you are a corporatist. You are not a progressive or a real liberal. You should not be running under the Democratic Party. Well, maybe you should, seeing as how you corrupted them, but for the most part, you are a Republican. And that's the end of that. So, almost no sniffling from Trump. I mean, he sniffled a tiny bit, but for the most part, you have the first debate where he was sniffling a whole lot, the second one a whole lot, and the third one only a tiny bit. So virtually no sniffling, just a tiny bit. So I guess he didn't do coke this time around, I guess. Assuming he did coke the first times, but I thought that was pretty noteworthy to mention this time around. And of course, Trump made the statement of bad hombres coming into the country, or something along those lines. We have bad hombres, which I'm pretty sure is Spanish for bad dudes. So he was basically, again, this goes into the whole lie that Trump is anti-Mexican or anti-Latino. Maybe I believed that at first. He was slightly more prejudiced. I mean, he certainly has that kind of prejudice, but I don't definitely think he hates Mexicans. I mean, or at least all of them, because at least with the first debate, or not the debate, but when he announced his presidency and he said, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, I thought that was slightly insensitive, but at the same time, his implication for that was illegals. Of course, if you want to talk about illegals and what they do to the country, that's a totally different discussion. I have pretty controversial thoughts on them, and I'm actually pretty supportive of illegals. Now, people are going to take that out of context, but I will elaborate that in another video. Don't get me wrong. Wait until that video. But for the most part, when he said bad hombres, he was just talking about, again, the illegals who are bad. So the criminals, the rapists, all the people he was specifically talking about. Now, again, Hillary claimed that WikiLeaks is just Russia performing cyber attacks on the United States, stealing information. That is not true. There was no facts before that stated that Russia was behind WikiLeaks. At the time of the recording of this, it has been proven Russia had nothing to do with it. It was actually an American source, which a lot of people already assumed. And I mean, come on, Hillary. Are you sure people have to do cyber attacks? I mean, if people want American information, they can get it from your private server. Now, of course, that's a false claim. Tampering, blah, blah, blah. We've been over this. Russia had nothing to do with this. Hillary called Trump a president for Russia. There is no proof that Trump is a puppet for Russia, but maybe he is. Who knows? That is a totally controversial, a totally different subject, but for the most part, I find it hypocritical for Hillary to call Trump a puppet and Trump actually mentioned that he's just like, no, I'm not a puppet. You're the puppet, which I found kind of immature. But he could have said it in a more sophisticated manner. Like I'm gonna explain here, Hillary Clinton is the real puppet. Because at the end of the day, the military-industrial complex has their hand up Hillary's ass. Big Pharma has their hand up Hillary's ass. Wall Street, corporations, everybody has their hands, except for the American people has their hands up Hillary Clinton's ass. Like she is just corrupt as hell. She's the real puppet. But I digress. Hillary described the time of nuclear weapons use. Now, a lot of people probably didn't pick up on this, but I found it kind of interesting whenever she was talking about there's like 2 minutes before nukes fire or something, or there's 10 people who are in control of that or something like that. I appreciated how she wanted to go into the specifics about how much she knew, but you really shouldn't talk about the use of nuclear weapons because you don't want to give people that information. You don't want to let your competition or your enemies know how long it takes to use those weapons or any specifics. You don't want to let them know. You want to keep them wondering. That's the whole point of nuclear weapons, is not necessarily to use them. The reason people want nukes is more of a deterrent to say, hey, if you plan on nuking me, don't, because I will also fuck you up back. So you want to keep that mystery of how powerful your weapons are. Do not specify anything about your nuclear weapons use, the capacity, the speed in which you can use them, or the reaction time. One thing I found interesting that Hillary adopted Trump's immature behavior in this debate. Now Trump, I think he was pretty reasonable in the first and second debate to be immature, but because he was being treated unfairly or something like that, and then he would try to respond. I mean, sometimes he was being immature, but for the most part he was being reasonable, but I think he should have not been mature the other halftime, and he should have just waited and argued back when it was his turn why he felt he was being unfairly treated. But for the most part, Hillary would talk past her time or talk during Trump's time, and we could just completely ignore the moderator whenever they try to get Hillary to stop and let Trump have his turn. So I found that pretty interesting. Hillary adopted that immature behavior. And Chris Wallace, he obviously has a sense of humor, because I'm pretty sure at least 3 times during the debate he chuckled. I remember there was 1 time or 2 times where Chris Wallace brought something up that Trump wanted him to bring up, and then Trump said, thank you, or that's right. And then both times the crowd and Chris laughed, so I found it pretty funny whenever Trump was like, correct. Like, he's the moderator, I'm pretty sure he's gonna know if what he's saying is correct. Or, thank you, whenever he brought up whatever he wanted. Another funny thing, or the next point, I should probably say. So we're going through a lot of stuff here. Cyber attacks, puppets, nuclear weapons use. Trump said, whenever Hillary's talking about Trump's tax returns or his money or whatever, Trump was just like, such a nasty woman. And of course the feminists and the social justice warriors found that insulting, and they were like, oh, let's embrace the nasty woman thing. Whatever. And the truth is, Hillary is pretty nasty. The way that she cheats at the elections, the way that she does all this sleazy stuff. She is a pretty nasty woman. Let's be completely honest. Trump was right about that. But in some ways, Trump is also nasty. A nasty man, So, one thing that I find pretty interesting that nobody else was talking about, really, is the part where the candidates had to compliment each other. Hillary talked about how Hillary is talking about how Trump's kids were, successful, all that stuff. So she didn't really want to compliment Trump, so to speak, but just the kids. So she kind of dove around, building up her competition while still answering and complimenting Trump, so to speak. Whereas Trump actually had the courage to compliment Hillary directly, talking about how she never gives up, she's a fighter, and how she can just keep fighting on. So I found that pretty interesting how Trump was the bigger man, because he actually complimented Hillary directly, calling her a fighter, how she never gives up, whatever, all that stuff. And then Hillary kind of diverted and talked about Trump's kids, to which some people on the right, I know some conspiracy theorists were talking about how they felt that Hillary was saying that as a bit of a threat, like a mafia threat, where it's like, oh, you got a nice family, you'd be ashamed if something were to happen to them. Those, even for me, I found that pretty far-fetched. But for the most part, October 19th debate, or the third presidential debate for 2016, hosted by Chris Wallace, In my opinion, Trump slightly won. Just like the first debate, he slightly won. Just a tiny bit. He didn't crush like he did in the second debate. It wasn't a tie like the VP debate. It was like the first debate where it was tie. Or, sorry, not tie. Trump slightly won. That's just my thoughts, though. If you disagree or agree, you can leave comments down below. This has been Riley from Wookie Cookie. I'll catch you guys next time.